It was the third morning in September, and the tractor had been idling wrong since 7, and Petra had been listening to it from the edge of the south pasture where she and Maya had been walking. Not the aggressor still, not the alert bark. Petra's head moved toward the sound, the way it moved toward things that required attention rather than response. Maya had been listening too. She had learned, in 14 years of naval special warfare, to hear the difference between a thing that was wrong and a thing that was simply unfamiliar, and the tractor in the adjacent field was wrong. She went over the fence line. The tractor was in the middle of the field with the engine still running, and the man in the seat was not moving, and Maya crossed the field at a run. Commander Maya Reyes had been retired from the Navy for 14 months. She had moved to Guadalupe County, Texas 14 months ago because a man named Joseph Hawthorne lived along the river here, and she had been living 5 miles from his gate for over a year, and she had not knocked on it until Petra led her over a fence line on a September morning, and the rest became, simply, what happened. Subscribe if you haven't found this channel before. This is the kind of story we tell here. Maya was 39 and had been a naval special warfare sniper for 14 years, which meant she had spent 14 years developing a capability so far outside the normal parameters of human achievement that the people inside the community who knew what she had done did not fully discuss it, because some things are acknowledged rather than spoken. She had done 4 deployments and had taken a number of difficult shots in a number of classified contexts, and had been decorated for some of them and classified out of the record for others. The specific one that mattered to this story had happened 9 years ago, in a location that is not named in this account for reasons that remain in effect. On a morning when 22 operators from 4 elite units had assessed a target at a distance that no confirmed record had yet reached, and had determined that the variables could not be adequately controlled and had stood down, Maya had not been there for any of the 22 assessments. She had come in last after the window had been declared effectively closed, and she had done the mathematics that no one had yet applied correctly. Atmospheric modeling, not ballistics, the air itself, not the bullet, and she had lain down and waited, and then she had fired. The shot had landed where it was intended to land. The person it was intended to save had lived. The operation was classified in its entirety. She had moved to Texas because she had found, in retirement, that the carrying of certain things was easier when done in proximity to the person they concerned. She had not been able to explain this to herself fully. She had looked up Colonel Joseph Hawthorne, found the farm on the Guadalupe, and had driven past the gate in April of the previous year and then in October, and then had rented a property nearby in November and had been living there since, circling, going on morning walks with Petra past the southern fence line where the cedar and live oak gave way to pasture. She had thought, for 14 months, about knocking on the gate. Petra had found a more direct approach. Petra was 6 years old, a Belgian Malinois, tawny with a black muzzle and eyes that suggested she was conducting a continuous assessment of all available information and had not yet delivered her final report. She had served Maya's last 2 deployments and had been with her since. She had a specific quality in the presence of certain people, veterans of particular experience, that Maya had observed and not fully categorized, a kind of direct, immediate recognition, as though she could read the register of someone's service in their posture or their stillness, or some frequency Maya could not detect. She had gone to Joseph Hawthorne the way she went to people she had already decided about, directly, without the performance of approach. Joseph Hawthorne had been 82 years old for 4 months and had been on this land for 30 years, since he left the Army in 1994, with 2 stars and a specific kind of tiredness that can only be earned and cannot be described. He had commanded special forces in Vietnam in 1968 and 1969, had gone back for the Gulf War in 1991, where he had commanded a combined arms operation that had been cited in 3 subsequent military studies and was still being taught in certain programs, and had come home and bought this farm because Eleanor had grown up in the hill country and had been patient for 26 years while Joseph served and had asked for one thing in return, which was the river. They had been on the Guadalupe for 18 years before Eleanor died. Joseph had stayed because the river was Eleanor's and the land was Daniel's, and the live oak at the river bend was where both of them were now, and he was not leaving. Daniel had been his only child, had served 3 tours across 2 decades of America's various commitments, had survived things that his father was too experienced to pretend were not close calls, had come home after each one with the specific understated wholeness of a man who understood what he had been close to and had chosen not to make it the center of his identity. Had been killed in a training accident 6 years ago, in the third year of what was supposed to be a quieter phase. Joseph had buried him at the live oak where the river bent west, in the place Daniel had said once he would want to be, and Joseph had set a stone there and had kept the land the way Daniel had kept his things, carefully, without sentiment, with the understanding that the keeping was a form of the relationship continuing. He had kept a photograph in the kitchen, a team photograph from an operation 9 years ago that Daniel had kept in his effects and that had come home after the training accident with the rest of them. Every face in it had been assessed by Joseph over 6 years because that was who Joseph was. He assessed things. It was the habit of 40 years. He knew the faces. He was still learning what some of them meant. Is there someone you have been circling? Someone you've been meaning to reach? Someone whose door you haven't been able to knock on? Who is waiting without knowing they're waiting? Type their name below, or just the distance. I read every one. Joseph had heat exhaustion mild from working through the morning in September temperatures that were still touching 95. He was conscious and oriented and extremely displeased about being found in his tractor. He expressed this displeasure in the specific compressed vocabulary of a man who has spent 40 years giving orders and does not enjoy being on the receiving end of concern. Maya helped him off the tractor without commenting on the displeasure. Petra stayed close to his left side across the field and into the house, which was the stone and cedar farmhouse Joseph had built with 2 other men in 1996, and which had the specific density of a structure built to last through weather and time by people who knew what both of those things looked like. She made him drink water. He submitted to this because it was physically necessary. He looked at Petra, who had placed herself at his left knee with the proprietorial ease of a dog who has decided where she belongs. He said, "You're the woman from the Prentice Road place." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You've been there a year." 14 months, she said. He looked at her. He had the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years reading situations and people and had seen enough to know when there was more than the surface of a thing. He said, "What branch?" She told him. He nodded once. He drank the rest of the water. He said, "I have a citation from the county. You know anything about property code variance processes?" She said, "I know someone who does." They sat at the kitchen table for the next 2 hours. Maya read the citation, a watershed protection finding on a small outbuilding near the river. Built in 1998 that had come to the county's attention through what appeared, from the filing record, to be a neighbor complaint. Joseph's attorney had provided an estimate. The variance filing would cost $8,000, or the structure would need to come down. Calvert's name did not appear in the filing, but his attorney's firm did, at the bottom of the complaint record, as the initiating party. Maya looked at the kitchen wall while she thought. On the wall, Eleanor's photographs from the hill country, a map of the property with boundary lines in red pencil, and the team photograph from the operation 9 years ago, in a plain frame, positioned at eye level for a man of Joseph's height. She looked at the photograph for as long as she could look at it without it meaning more than it should mean at this particular moment. She could see in the back row a figure that was herself, younger, thinner in the face, in field gear with her hair pulled back. She had not known Joseph had this photograph. She had understood in the abstract that the photograph existed and that Daniel had kept it. She had not known it was on Joseph's wall. She looked at the citation in her hand. Joseph was watching her. She said, "I'll make a call this afternoon." She did not explain what call, or why she was the person to make it, or what she knew that made her the right person to make it. She made notes on the margin of the citation in the same precise, minimal handwriting she used for everything. What Joseph said when she came back the following morning, and what he did not say, was the thing that would stay with her the longest. If you had been in Maya's position, sitting at that kitchen table looking at that photograph, what would you have done? Tell me below. I read every comment. She made 4 calls from the road outside the property. The first was to a veterans property rights organization in Austin that she had researched in the months since moving to Guadalupe County. The second was to a land use attorney in San Antonio who had been recommended by the organization. The third was to a former colleague in Naval Special Warfare who was now at a Veterans Services office in Washington and who had specific connections to county-level property disputes affecting veterans. The fourth was to no one she could name in this account. She came back the following morning with the attorney's analysis and the note that the initiating complaint, filed through Calvert's firm, had potentially violated a county provision against the use of third-party code complaints as a real estate pressure tactic, which was a finding the county attorney would be invited to review. Joseph listened to all of this with the attention of a man who has processed operational intelligence for 40 years and can follow a briefing. He said, "You knew who I was when you moved to Prentice Road." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Daniel's photograph is on the wall." "I saw it," she said. He said, "I have looked at that photograph for 6 years. I know every face in it except 2. He paused. "I know one of them now." The kitchen was quiet. Petra was at Joseph's left knee, where she had been every morning for 2 days. His hand was on her back. The September light through the cedar outside the kitchen window had the specific quality of hill country light when the season has finally decided to change. Lower, cooler, gentler on the limestone than August had been. Maya said the operation was classified. "I know what classified means," Joseph said. "Then you know I can't." "I know you can't," he said. "I'm not asking you to." He looked at the photograph. He said, "He lived 6 more years." She did not say anything. He said, "He would have wanted me to know." He paused. "Not who, just that someone did." They sat with that. The river was audible from the kitchen window. The specific sound that Guadalupe makes when the water is low in September and moves over the limestone shelves with the unhurried patience of something that has been moving this way for 10,000 years and intends to continue. She had taken the shot at 4,000 meters. She had not been able to walk up his driveway. That was the whole of what needed to be said about the distance between those two things, and neither of them said it, and it was understood. Rich Calvert arrived 2 days later with the county code officer and a development attorney at 10 in the morning. He came in a white SUV with the Calvert Properties logo on the door and the specific manner of a man who has identified an obstacle and has arrived with the correct instruments to remove it. He had heard through the county office that Hawthorne had hired an attorney, and he had come to have what he described in the message he'd sent the day before as a good-faith conversation about the path forward. He was 51, large, with the easy authority of someone who has made a number of successful real estate transactions and has associated this with being generally correct about things. He looked at Maya when he came in with the recalibrated expression of someone who was expecting an old man alone and has found a more complicated room. Petra rose from beside Joseph's chair. She did not bark. She placed herself between Calvert and the kitchen with the specific, unhurried commitment of a dog that has completed its assessment, and the sound from her chest was the low, continuous register. Not alarm, not warning, but the steadier note of a dog that has decided and is simply present. Her eyes did not leave Calvert. Calvert looked at the dog. He looked at the county code officer, whose name was Henderson, and who had been in this kind of room before, and who appeared to be finding reasons to examine the baseboards. The development attorney opened his folder and began describing the citation, the timeline, and the county's interest in bringing the property into compliance. He described the development potential of the acreage, the river frontage, the accessibility from the highway, in terms designed to sound like an opportunity being generously shared. Joseph looked at him. He said, "My son is buried here." He said it the way he said everything, to the room, as a statement of what was true, without performance. The attorney continued for approximately half a second before stopping. The room was still. Henderson, the code officer, had his clipboard in front of him and was not consulting it. Maya spoke. She described, in the specific factual register she used for everything, the findings of the land use attorney she had retained, that the initiating complaint had been filed by a firm with a disclosed financial interest in the property's acquisition, which constituted a potential conflict under Section 4.7 of Guadalupe County's code enforcement provision, and that a formal review of the complaint's origin had been requested and was expected to result in a suspension of the citation pending investigation. She described the provision itself by section number. She described the attorney's analysis of the Hawthorne property's original structure permits, all of which were in the county record and predated the current code by a margin that qualified them for grandfather protection under Texas Property Code Chapter 211. She said it without heat. She described what was true and let truth do what truth does. Calvert's folder was in his hands. He looked at it the way people look at things that were supposed to work. He said that he had great respect for what Colonel Hawthorne had contributed and that none of this was personal. Joseph said, "I know." He said it in a tone that meant, "I know it wasn't personal." That is exactly what makes it what it is. Petra did not move until the white SUV was out of the driveway. She watched the gate after it was gone. Then she walked back to Joseph's chair and pressed her flank against his leg and stayed there. Joseph put his hand on her back. He looked at the photograph on the wall. He said he had a dog he loved like this. He said Daniel's name. He said the dog's name, which was Buck, which had been a yellow lab who had died the year before Daniel did. He talked about Buck for a few minutes, the way Daniel had described him, the photographs Daniel had sent. And Maya listened because this was what was needed. And she was a person who could listen without filling the space with herself. The citation was suspended within 3 weeks, pending the county attorney's review of the complaint origin. The review found the conflict of interest provision applicable and recommended a formal ethics inquiry into the filing. Calvert's development project for the Hawthorne acreage was quietly set aside. The attorney's fees were paid by the Veterans Property Rights Organization on the basis that the case had produced a useful legal precedent for similar filings. The outbuilding near the river stayed standing. Maya started coming to the farm on Tuesday mornings. There was always something that needed doing. Cedar clearing, fence repair, a section of the stone wall along the river road that had been shifting since a high-water year in 2019. She came with Petra and worked through the morning and ate lunch at the kitchen table with Joseph and talked about the things that could be talked about and was quiet about the things that couldn't. In November, when the pecans were ready, she was there for that too. Joseph showed her how his father had harvested them, a specific technique with a pole and a tarp that took 2 people, and they worked through the afternoon in the pecans, along the south fence with the river visible through the cedar, and the light going flat and golden in the way of Texas November afternoons, when everything is finally settling. She had aimed for 9 years. She had arrived. Joseph never said directly what he knew. She never told him what she knew he knew. There was no ceremony about it and no declaration. Some things are acknowledged rather than spoken, which is a principle both of them had built careers around and which had not stopped being true in retirement. On a February morning, Joseph put the team photograph in a frame with better glass and moved it to the shelf above the mantel, next to Eleanor and Daniel and a photograph of Buck at the river. He did not tell Maya he had done this. She saw it the following Tuesday when she came for the cedar work, and she said nothing. She had taken the shot at 4,000 meters. She had not been able to walk up his driveway, and then Petra had gone over the fence line on a September morning, and the rest had followed, the way things follow when a dog has already made the decision and a person has had the sense to come along. What Maya Reyes did in Guadalupe County, Texas was not complicated in the way of things that look uncomplicated. She had moved 5 miles from a man's gate because she could not stop carrying something she had done for him. And she had lived there for 14 months until a dog and a tractor and a September morning had done what she had not been able to do herself. She had shown up eventually. Everything after that was Tuesday mornings and pecan harvests and a stone wall along the river road that needed 2 people to do right. She had aimed for 9 years. She had arrived. This story is for every person carrying something they did for someone else. Something significant, something the other person may not know about. Something that has kept you circling without letting you close the distance. And for anyone who has been waiting without knowing they were waiting for someone to come over the fence line, is there someone you've been meaning to reach? Someone whose door you haven't knocked on yet? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe. So you're here for the next one. Which moment in the story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.